before the meeting?
I typically brought an agenda with me to the meeting, one for her and one for me.
Did you keep copies of your agendas after the meetings?
I would keep my copy, yes.
Obviously, you're right. You wouldn't take her copy back, right?
Right.
Okay. Did you know whether or not she prepared her own agenda for those meetings?
I don't know if she did or did not. I was not given copies of agendas. Usually I went in with my own agendas.
When you were in the face-to-face meetings, did you ever see her writing on a document other than the one that you gave her?
She could be writing on a piece of paper, yes.
Okay. And what was the purpose of preparing a written agenda for those meetings?
It would typically be information that I felt I wanted to talk with her about. Matters involving the office, my work, the work of the office.
Did you go through some kind of filtering process? I mean, obviously, your office covered a lot of different areas from what you said yesterday, right?
Yes.
And particularly during this time, it was very, very busy in your office, wasn't it?
Our office was usually very busy, but, I mean, yes, there were things going on at that time.
So how did you decide what things that you would put on your agenda to take to President Simon as opposed to all of the other hundreds of things you would deal with directly on your own?
It would depend on the issue. If it was something that was where we needed permission of the president to go forward on an initiative, then that might be on the agenda. If there were matters involving upcoming meetings that she was going to participate in that I wanted to brief her and prepare her for, those might be on the agenda. If there were items that were, I'd call them hot button issues, then those might be on the agenda unless I had reason to talk with her earlier, if there was a need to talk to her before a meeting.
How did you define hot button issues?
Hot button issues could be potential disruptions on campus. It could be something that was just brought to my attention that I thought she should be made aware of. I would have to use my discretion on those things that I would think would be important to bring to her attention at that time.
Were these things that had the potential to make MSU look bad?
It could be things that make the institution look bad or look good. If I felt that under the circumstances it would be important to bring it to her attention, then I would bring it to her attention.
I'm not sure that we could cover this yesterday. Did you have standing items that you regularly included in that agenda?
A standing item, if it were something that was of an ongoing matter, then I would probably put it back on the agenda. But that would depend on what the issue was.
Well, for example, if something wasn't going to be resolved within the period from one meeting to the next, would you roll items over and bring that item back again?
I could, yes.
And maybe update on status or
sure.
Whatever? Okay.
Yes.
Or if you were working on a project that took multiple months to put together, would you put that on the agenda over and over?
Yes, I would.
If there was a category of items that again had the possibility of making MSU look bad, let's say there was a particular issue on campus, could that item be repeated on your agenda until it was either addressed or resolved at that level?
Again, if it were something that was of consequence or we were working on over a protracted period of time, I could carry it forward on the agenda.
I believe your testimony yesterday was that at one point there was a reorganization in your office. Do you recall those questions? When you went from, I think it was the Office of Affirmative Action to I3, and then another one from I3 to OIE? Am I saying that correctly?
The reference to the change in the office name was not a reorganization. It was just a change in the name of the office in 2007, I believe it was.
So nothing else changed in 07 when you changed from, or to become the I3?
No.
Did you add personnel or other responsibilities?
No, it was a name change.
In the last reorg, when OIE was created, that was split out from I3, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so a number of your responsibilities went with that, is that right?
For the most part, yes.
All of the investigative functions for the sexual assault, sexual harassment complaints were moved out from under your area?
Yes, a separate office called Office of Institutional Equity was created. And the investigatory functions and oversight of that work, both the anti-discrimination policy and Title IX, were placed under the responsibility of the Office of Institutional Equity.
And when did that happen?
That, I believe it was in March or April of 2015, when the oversight of the investigatory functions were going to be completed by someone else.
So March or April of 2015, that's when they pulled all of that away from your area?
I think formally the announcement was made in April of 2015.
Do you know why that happened?
There was a ongoing investigation by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, and the decision was made to separate the investigatory functions from the other work that was being done by the office.
Was that part of the settlement that was reached in 2015?
I don't know if that was a part of the settlement itself. The settlement didn't come out until September of 2015. The decision to move the functions and responsibilities occurred before the final resolution agreement or report from Office of Civil Rights.
In 2014, how many people did you directly supervise?
Sorry, I have to count, if you don't mind.
Your Honor, it's been asked and answered.
I haven't heard a question about how many people she supervised. I haven't heard that yet.
That's a whole other.
I'm not going to say, but I know the answer. I heard it when she answered it before, but not to say because
Thank you. Okay.
I believe it was 7 or 8 total staff in the office.
And as I understood your testimony, there were like two halves of the office that you were supervising. There was the investigative side, and then what was the other half?
Well, we had separate focus areas within the office.
Okay.
One of those was institutional equity. The other was education development. The third was community outreach. And the fourth was research, assessment, and grants.
And how many of that 7 or 8 people were responsible for investigating complaints of sexual assault or sexual harassment in 2014?
I believe it was 3.
And who were those 3?
Christine Moore, Amanda Garcia Williams, And Rashida Harrison joined us later in, I think, probably August of 2014.
August of 2014?
August of 2014, primarily doing intake as opposed to investigations.
So before August, then, for the entire campus of MSU, you had 2 people to investigate sexual assault and sexual harassment claims?
During what period of time?
2014, before August of 2014.
How far before 2014?
Well, when did Amanda Garcia Williams come on board?
I believe she came on in 2012, either the late 2011 or 2012. I can't remember exactly when.
And then Christine Moore?
She joined in 2007.
Was there anybody else doing those types of investigation other than Christine Moore in 2007?
I might assist from time to time, but generally those were done by Christine Moore. But that was a university non-discrimination policy and sexual harassment policy that was very different than the one in 2014.
So from 2007 to 2012, there was only one investigator for all of those types of complaints other than when you would assist?
Your Honor, I'm going to object on relevancy grounds. This has nothing to do with these charges and what Luanna Simon knew in 2014 regarding Larry Nasser. So we're getting pretty far afield here, Your Honor, and this seems completely irrelevant to me.
Yes, Your Honor. As we covered yesterday, there were complaints that were filed against MSU at the end of that time period, 2010 and 2012, specifically about the way that they were investigating sexual assault complaints. And then the 2011 Dear Colleague letter came out during that same time. And all of that rolled through from 2011 through 2014 in this specific office trying to respond to complaints against the way it had handled it and the instructions to change the way that it handled it. And so that was the climate that existed in 2014 and had been started back in 2010.
The climate in 2014 is not at issue in this case.
Doesn't the climate support action or lack of action? I'm going to allow it. It's at least minimally relevant.
Thank you, Your Honor.
May we please have a continuing objection, Your Honor, to this line of questioning?
So from 2007 to 2012, when Amanda Garcia Williams was hired, Christine Moore was the person who was handling those investigations other than when you directly would assist?
Within the office, yes.
Okay. And then in 2012, it would be both Christine Moore and Amanda Garcia Williams?
Amanda Garcia Williams was responsible for student on student, and Christine Moore was responsible for employee complaints.
Employee what?
Employee complaints, discrimination complaints.
Complaints against employees?
Employee to employee or employee and student.
Okay. How many students did MSU have at that time?
At what time?
2012?
I can't tell you.
2000, even 2014?
I believe we were at 50,000, but I can't say that with any certainty.
Somewhere around 50,000?
I would say somewhere around that number.
And how many employees?
I'm guessing between, that number could be 11 to 12,000.
And that includes not just faculty members, right? Obviously, there's all kinds of staff at MSU.
Yes.
Okay, so somewhere between 11 and 12,000.
Yes.
So we have one person to handle complaints involving 50,000 approximately students, right? That's Amanda Garcia Williams.
Yes.
And then one person to handle any complaints that would involve 11 or 12,000 employees, either employee to employee or employee on the student.
I need to clarify so that there's an understanding that at that period of time, the policy provided something different, particularly under the university's sexual harassment policy that existed prior to 2011.
Okay, and I understand that we'll get to the policy change in 2011, but at the time of 2012, you had two people, one for 50,000 students and one for 11 or 12,000 staff members. Is that right?
Yes, but
And
others...
then you would assist as
Your Honor,
needed?
Jack, you cut her off before she was finished answering. At least extend the courtesy of letting her complete her answer, please.
I'm sure you will. You remember what you were going to say?
Yes, I do.
Okay, finish.
The way the policy was written prior to 2011, units had responsibilities, others on campus had responsibilities for doing investigations beyond Christine Moore.
Okay, but that was prior to the change in 2011, right?
Yes.
I was just asking about 2012 because Amanda Garcia wasn't there in 2011. So from 2012 was my question. You had one person assigned to handle complaints from 50,000 students, and that was Amanda Garcia Williams, correct?
And as I mentioned,
That's
I
a
can't...
yes or no. I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. You had one person, Amanda Garcia Williams, who was responsible for investigating complaints of student-on-student sexual harassment or sexual assault in 2012.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going
Okay.
to object. In fairness to this witness, she ought to be allowed to please complete her answer to Mr. Teeter's question.
No, Your Honor, if it's a yes or no question, that is exactly what I'm asking for, is a yes or no answer. Attempts to extend a question or evade it are not appropriate.
Well, then this is leading, Your Honor.
Well, and Your Honor, as the court is well aware, in certain circumstances, if a witness becomes adverse, I can use leading questions.
There is no...
I don't see this as leading. I don't see it as adverse. Mr. Teeter, you can just slow down a little bit. We're taking a lot of time on some rather small issues. But let's give her the opportunity to finish her answer. Actually, I think I've heard this several times already about the two people investigating between 2012 and 2014, and before that was one person. And so why don't we move on?
So in 2014, in that summer, there were still only the two people, Amanda Garcia Williams and Christine Moore, in May of 2014?
I believe that is correct.
I believe your testimony yesterday was you were a direct report to President Simon. That was your immediate supervisor. Is that correct?
Yes.
How many other people reported directly to President Simon in 2014?
The other vice presidents, the provost and the executive vice president, and I can't give you the exact number, but I know it was over 10.
So the vice presidents, I'm sorry, how many of those were there, do you know, in 2014?
I can't tell you what the number was in 2014.
And then an executive vice president?
Executive vice president, yes,
And the provost?
and the provost,
And you?
and myself.
Anyone else?
I believe the police chief, the athletic director.
Anyone else?
To the best of my knowledge, I've identified between 10 vice presidents, and then I gave you the names of the others that I can remember in 2014.
So 10 vice presidents, executive vice president, provost, yourself, athletic director, and the police chief. Did we get them all?
I believe that's the correct number, but again, I can't say that it was more. I know it was more than 10.
And you used the term cabinet yesterday. Those folks who you just listed, is that the cabinet we were talking about?
I believe it is, yes.
And how often did the cabinet meet?
It would vary, but we would have meetings scheduled generally once a month, but we didn't always meet.
Who set the agenda for the cabinet meetings?
I don't know. It came out of the president's office, so
What types of things were discussed at those cabinet meetings during 2014?
the agendas were usually one or two items. So roundtable was a typical agenda item, but it would vary.
Were they all like big items? If there's only one or two and you're talking about basically the entire upper layer of management for MSU?
It could be items that, at least among those who were attending, they felt was of consequence to share with others on the cabinet.
And you said roundtable. What do you mean?
Individuals that were in attendance at the meeting would talk about things that they felt would be relevant for others of us on the cabinet to be aware of.
And did you bring items to those cabinet meetings in 2014?
On occasion.
Do you recall what items you would have brought or what kind of items you brought?
No.
Was there a time that the Michigan State University received a letter from the Office of Civil Rights advising them about their Title IX investigation practices?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear the first part.
Was there a time when MSU received a letter from the Office of Civil Rights regarding their Title IX investigation practices?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of that letter?
Through the Office of General Counsel.
And was that what's referred to as the Dear Colleague letter, or are we talking about a second letter?
I thought your question related back to a complaint.
That's what I want to clarify, because there's actually a couple letters that MSU received from the Office of Civil Rights. Is that right?
Yes.
One of them that included some complaints against MSU for their investigative process.
Yes.
And then was there a second or different letter in 2011 that was called the Dear Colleague letter?
Yes,
What was that for?
That was in April of 2011, and the Dear Colleague letter was issued by the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Education to all of federal contractors across the country, including schools and higher education, advising us of what our obligations were under Title IX.
Let me show you what's been admitted as People's Exhibit 22. Is this the Dear Colleague letter you just described?
Yes.
And I'll talk about that in a minute, because as I understand it, that required your office to do a number of things in response to that letter, didn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned the other letter. Let me show you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 30. And is that the complaint letter that you were talking about?
Yes.
What was the date of that one?
It's got a date stamp of July 21st, 2011.
And was that also something that your office had to assist in responding to?
We would have been involved, probably, depending on the items that were listed here, yes.
And is that the one that OCR followed up with a physical visit to the campus? Was it that complaint letter?
I believe it was this one. There may have been others as well that were filed.
And that was also in 2011?
The others?
No, this one, I'm sorry.
This
This one, the Exhibit 30.
This was 2011,
And the Dear Colleague letter was
and the
also
Dear
2011.
Colleague letter was in 2011.
Move the admission of Proposed Exhibit 30.
Yes, Your Honor. First of all, it's hearsay. Second of all, it's totally irrelevant. This was in 2011. It pertains to a complaint by one student. It has nothing to do with Larry Nasser. There's absolutely no evidence that Dr. Simon was aware of this complaint by this one student. So it has nothing to do with what Dr. Simon knew in 2014. And then finally, Your Honor, it's not even complete because I noticed there are large sections of this letter that are redacted. So I don't even know what the redactions were, but it's obviously not complete. So for all of those reasons, Your Honor, we object.
Okay, well, I think it's somewhat relevant in creating the stage for what was going on in investigations at Michigan State leading up to 2014. And teachers that may have had problems with them. What was the last objection?
The last objection, Your Honor, is that the exhibit is not complete. Large sections of it are redacted, so I have no idea what the full exhibit says. So it's obviously not complete. You can't discern anything from it.
Ms. Corliss, yeah.
Has Mr. Silverstein the whole thing? And why are things redacted from?
Your Honor, there's, the letter received from the Office of Civil Rights redacts the personal identifying information of the complainants. And again, it's not being offered for the truth of the statements made in that letter, but the reaction that it created by MSU. So those redactions are not necessary for the reaction that it generated. They responded to the complaints.
It's more than just identifying information, obviously, Your Honor, to look through it.
I don't know how to tell. Did you get the whole letter or not?
No, I've never seen the whole letter. No, I've just received this version with large redactions in it.
So as an officer of the court, can you tell me that you didn't take out anything that has any meaning related to the Michigan State procedures or culture?
Yes, Your Honor, because I didn't do the redactions. They were actually done by the Office of Civil Rights. So I don't have an unredacted copy. And so it is specifically being offered for the purpose, just as Ms. Russell testified, that from the receipt of that, their office had to begin certain things to respond to those complaints. And we also heard some of that from Christine Moore yesterday.
And then probably a business record too?
It's
OCR?
well, I don't have the certification that it was pulled as a business record, but it is certainly part of their ordinary course of business to send out these types of letters to universities. That's true.
Okay, Your Honor, again, the only thing that is relevant is what Dr. Simon knew. So are we admitting this conditionally upon the prosecution being able to link up later on that Dr. Simon was aware of this?
Or should have been aware, or should receive that showing the culture where this problem, the master problem, was created and allowed to continue. And the key, of course, in this case is that it end up in some way with Dr. Simon. I'm not sure what that way is going to be yet, but I believe that Mr. Peter is guiding me along the path. And so, additionally, it's allowed so that I can see what we're going to future.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Russell, in response to this, you said this was one of several complaints MSU received from the Office of Civil Rights back in that same time period, 2011, 2012, is that correct?
I believe there was more than one, but I can't say if it came in 2011 or 2012.
And as I understand it, that those investigations stay open for a while. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was that part of what was resolved in the 2015 resolution, whereas OCR's decisions on those complaints in 2011 and 12?
I believe so, but I don't have the 2015 document in front of me, so
At some point, you mentioned in September of 2015, there was a resolution reached by Michigan State with the Office of Civil Rights that resolved the complaint like the one you have in front of you as Exhibit 30.
yes, there was a report with items that identified resolution within that document.
Was President Simon involved in that process? Was she aware of the complaints that were filed by OCR?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation and calls for speculation.
Well, if she can answer it, without speculating, I'll take the answer, but don't answer it if you don't know.
I don't know.
Well, you met with her once a month, right?
Yes,
Okay. And you're in charge of the Title IX compliance office, correct?
yes, but I wasn't.
And this was a complaint against the way the Title IX investigations were being handled by your office, is that right?
The Office of General Counsel was leading the university's response to
That
this.
wasn't my question. My question was
Your Honor,
this
I'm not going
complaint.
to object, Your Honor. He has to let the witness, in fairness to her, answer his question.
Actually, I don't, Your Honor. If it's non-responsive, and I'll move to strike the last answer because it was non-responsive.
Your Honor, it was responsive. Please, just let her finish the answer, and then he can ask whatever follow-up questions he wants.
Your Honor, as much as I appreciate counsel's guidance, I have the right and the ability to carry out this examination. When this witness does not answer a direct question, I'll move to strike it, and I can stop her from asking or answering the question I didn't ask.
Your Honor, he thinks he's the judge. He's not. He doesn't have total right. He's not a dictator. She has a right to answer the question. She was answering it appropriately and specifically saying an answer to the question. That it didn't. It was the special counsel that was involved.
She was having some explanations, which you can certainly bring out on cross-examination, and Mr. Teeter doesn't bring it out during direct examination, but I'm not going to allow a narrative, but just be respectful and not create an adverse witness if one doesn't exist.
Let me go back, Ms. Russell. Your area of responsibility was the responding to Title IX complaints, is that correct?
Yes,
In fact, in the 2011 policy that was adopted, you specifically are the person who's responsible for overseeing all of those investigations, is that right?
coordination of our responsibilities under Title IX, yes, as the Title IX coordinator.
So, when a complaint came in 2011, and actually multiple complaints from 2011 to 2012 about investigations of Title IX, those would have been under your responsibility, is that right?
Not completely,
Okay, partly.
partly, yes.
And as your part, did you communicate that information and your involvement in responding to those complaints with President Simon in your monthly one-on-one meetings?
I can't tell you whether I did or did not. I don't have any specific recall at this point if I did or did not.
Well, and I'm curious because you were asked that same question in your May 25th, 2018 interview by the Michigan State Police. Do you recall that interview?
I have some recollection. I know I was interviewed by the state police in May.
And you were asked specifically the question, was President Simon involved in the investigations of the 3 complaints that were filed in 2011 or 2012? Do you remember that question?
Hold on a second, Your Honor, please. Can I have a page and line number so I know where we're talking about? So I can
Well,
see?
no, first I've asked her if she remembers the question, so I'll get to the part about page number in just a moment.
And you give it to him?
Yep. Yes, Your Honor. Do you remember that question being asked?
I don't remember the question being asked.
Do you remember telling the Michigan State Police, sure, yes, in answer to the question of whether or not President Simon was involved in the investigations of those 3 complaints?
Is there a page number from Mr. Silver?
Please.
May 25th. Page 14, line 7 through 13.
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Mr. Teeter?
Page 14,
Yeah, right.
line 6, and then is where the questioning begins, and it runs through line 13. Can you take a look at that, Ms. Russell?
I found it, thank you, Your Honor, but
Have you had the opportunity to review it, Ms. Russell?
Yes, I have.
And did you tell the police the truth when you answered that question on May 25th of 2018?
Yes.
And so when asked, then I'll ask you again, President Simon, was she involved in the investigations of the 3 complaints that were filed in 2011 or 2012?
what? You're reading her answer. That wasn't the question. She asked the question in the investigations of the 3 complaints that were filed in 2011 or 2012. You're mischaracterizing this.
You were asked the question just in general, was she involved in it? That was line 10. You see your answer in line 11. What was that?
It was a question. I said, in the investigations of the 3 complaints that were filed in 2011 or 12?
Question mark.
And then when you get down to line 16, what was your answer?
Yes, that's okay. I would assume that she did, but our office was not handling, if you will, the complaints that had been filed with OCR. Much of that effort was being led by the Office of General Counsel.
Okay. And in your monthly meetings with Ms.
She
Simon,
continues to answer that question in line 23.
Your Honor, if Mr. Morgenroth is going to testify, I would relish the opportunity to cross-examine him.
Well, I think you would, but I think you ought to act as an attorney and ask the appropriate questions. Line 23 continues.
Your Honor.
And
He just wants to pick sense.
you can bring that out in cross-exam.
I would.
Okay?
Thank you. So, Ms. Russell, in your monthly meetings with President Simon, did you review the investigations that were going on in your area from the Office of Civil Rights at any time during 2012, 13, or 14?
I can't say with any certainty that I did.
If those items were listed on her agenda,
It's possible that we may have talked about them, yes.
well, if they were listed on her agenda, would you have discussed them?
Are you talking about
Ms. Simon's,
that she made?
Ms. Simon's, Ms. Simon's monthly agenda.
Her,
Yes.
her agenda.
No, I'm sorry. Let me start that over. That was confusing. So, you prepared a monthly agenda for those meetings. We talked about that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you weren't sure whether or not Ms. Simon had prepared her own monthly agenda?
I was never given agendas from the president.
Okay. And if she prepared one, and the Office of Civil Rights investigations were on there, would you have discussed it with her?
I
I
have,
object, Your Honor. This is preposterous. She hasn't seen those agendas.
Court's going to see them today, Your Honor. There are agendas.
Simon's agenda?
Yes. So you will see them.
I don't
So
know.
my question was to this witness, if they were on Ms. Simon's agenda, would they have discussed the items on that agenda?
That's complete speculation.
She knows, because it doesn't seem like she even knew there, Dr. Simon had agendas there. So if Dr. Simon had agendas that she didn't know about, then she's not going to know if they're talking about items that were on that agenda.
Right, correct, Your Honor.
Moreover, Your Honor, she obviously is not going to know when Dr. Simon made notations on agendas, if in fact there are notations on her agendas. So the question is completely unfair and calls for speculation and conjecture by this witness.
Well, if she doesn't know the answers, she can say she doesn't know the answer. I think we can have her answer that instead of my answering.
That's okay. So at these monthly meetings, we talked about the agendas. You had a list of items that you brought into the meeting to talk about. Is that right?
Yes,
Were there also items that the President Simon would bring up in those meetings?
from time to time.
Okay. And so do you know whether or not she had a separate agenda?
I don't know.
Okay. If she had one, and for example, OCR was on it, could she have brought that up and discussed it in the meetings with you?
It's possible.
She obviously would have the authority to bring up anything she wants, right? She's the president of the university?
Yes.
Okay. So you indicated you were working with the Office of General Counsel and responding to those complaints? The 2011, 2012 complaints?
Yes.
What were you required to do in response to those complaints?
Again, the Office of the General Counsel was leading the university's response or its efforts to respond to their investigation. So I was taking my counsel from the Office of General Counsel.
Right.
But we were also in the process of making the changes in response to the Dear Colleague letter as well.
Let's stay with the complaints first. Okay. So my question was, I understand they were taking the lead, but what were you responsible to do in response to those complaints? What kind of things did they have you do?
I don't know if they were necessarily in response to the complaint from OCR or if what we were being asked to do or the things that we were doing were being responsive to the Dear Colleague letter.
Oh, okay, so it could have been either one or both?
Could have been either one or both.
Okay. As far as, at one point, were you required to produce copies of all the investigative files in your office?
Yes.
Do you know whether that was in response to the complaint or response to the Dear Colleague letter?
I can't say with certainty, but I would assume the complaints.
And did you also have to produce out of your office a spreadsheet of all of the investigations that were ongoing in 2014?
I don't know that we had to provide a spreadsheet of investigations to OCR in response to the complaint.
Let's go back to the Dear Colleague letter. What were some of the recommendations in that letter?
Your Honor, I would just like to clarify for the record that my continuing objection pertains to everything regarding the Dear Colleague letter so that I don't have to continue interrupting Mr. Teeter every time he brings it up.
Fine.
Thank
You can answer.
Can you repeat the question,
Sure.
please?
Going back to the Dear Colleague letter, what were some of the recommendations in that letter for MSU to follow?
Without looking at beginning on page 3 of the Dear Colleague letter, it talks about Title IX requirements related to sexual harassment and sexual violence and schools' obligations to respond to them. They state that schools have an obligation to respond to student sexual harassment that occurred off school grounds, outside a school's education program or activity. If a student files a complaint with the school, regardless of where it occurred, the school must process the complaint in accordance with its established procedures. They talk about procedural requirements pertaining to sexual harassment and sexual violence, specifically with respect to disseminating a notice of non-discrimination, designate at least one employee to coordinate its efforts to comply with and carry out its responsibilities under Title IX, and adopt and publish grievance procedures providing for prompt and equitable resolution of student and employee sex discrimination complaints, and that these requirements apply to all forms of sexual harassment, including sexual violence. They talk about each of those items, the A, B, and C. They talk about prompt and equitable requirements and number of elements in evaluating whether your grievance procedures provide for prompt and equitable resolution of sexual harassment complaints. Notice of grievance procedures, adequate, reliable, and impartial investigation of complaints. They identified designated and reasonably prompt timeframes, notice of outcome to the parties, education and prevention, remedies and enforcement, school investigations and reports to OCR.
So what kind of changes did your office have to make to comply with those recommendations?
The university had to change the process or the procedures that were in place to investigate. We had to make changes in our sexual harassment policy to comport with the expectations that are outlined in the Dear Colleague letter. We had to engage in broader education efforts. We had to investigate and provide within a time frame that they were recommending in their guidance. They assuring that the standard of proof was the one established by them, which was preponderance of the evidence.
Was that different than the standard of proof you've been using?
No.
Okay, you had already been using
Yes.
that? Okay. So is that what... and policy change actually moved more responsibility under your office?
Yes, it did.
Okay, because you had now student sexual assault complaints. You said training and education?
We were doing training and education, but we were now required to, with the guidance, expanded our scope of education beyond employees to students. And we started an educational campaign, mandatory reporters, mandatory training for students and faculty and staff.
But am I correct that you didn't add any additional staff then until 2012, though, to comply with all of the new requirements under the 2011 Dear Colleague letter and the 2011 MSU policy on sexual harassment?
For investigations,
Okay. Did you add other people for other areas?
no.
Okay. So clarify, you didn't add anybody else other than Amanda Garcia Williams in 2012?
We did not.
Okay. And who approves your budget? Who do you run it through?
The Office of the Provost, there's an annual budget setting process for support units on campus, academic support units on campus.
Does President Simon sign off on your budget?
Not typically. That would be, as best I know, through the Office of the Provost.
Did you ever go to her during your monthly meetings and talk about the increased responsibilities from the Title IX requirements and then also the new 2011 policy requirements?
As time was progressing, we didn't have a real sense of how much more activity there would be in the first couple of years of the changes that were being made.
Okay, my question was, though, did you talk to her about your additional responsibilities under the 2011 Dear Colleague letter and now the 2011 policy, the new policy on sexual harassment?
In 2011,
Did you talk with President Simon at any time from 2011 through 2015 about your additional responsibilities under both the Dear Colleague letter and the change in the policy?
Objection, Your Honor. That's one line from the brief. It calls for hearsay, Your Honor. He's asking, did she talk? And then he has certain concepts of certain communications. Calls for hearsay. It does not go to the state of mind, which I expect he's going to say, because as the Court of Appeals has ruled, the only state of mind that can satisfy that exception is the declarance. And the declarance state of mind has to be the issue. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Maybe I should say that. Thank you, Mr. Teeter. So very simply, that was a hearsay objection, and the basis for it is under 803, which I expect Mr. Teeter is going to say, that it goes to somebody's state of mind. The Court of Appeals has ruled the only relevant state of mind is the declarance state of mind. The declarance state of mind has to be directly at issue in this case, and it is not. And so the fact of her communicating with Simon and what she said is not relevant, doesn't satisfy the hearsay exception.
Your Honor, we're talking about a conversation between Ms. Russell and the defendant.
Yes, and again, the rule says, and the Court of Appeals guidance on the rule says, the only way to satisfy that exception for this, to my understanding, is that the declarance state of mind has to be at issue. I think he's trying to say her state of mind is an issue, and that only works if it's directly relevant to the matters of consequence of this.
Actually, Your Honor, my question is, did she talk with President Simon so that we would then know what President Simon was aware of, starting back in 2011 all the way through 2015 was my question, as it related to her specific area of responsibility, responding to the Title IX complaints, the OCR investigation, and the new policy. So it is absolutely relevant what the defendant knew at those particular junctures in response to each of those issues.
Saying it doesn't make a difference.
I'm saying under 8033 it does not make a difference. That's the declarance state of mind rule, and I'm not aware that there's another proffer for an exception.
Well, you're asking her to report what she said, right?
Right. It was a conversation between her and President Simon, so that would be first. That's not hearsay. And then the second thing is...
Which are not hearsay. 801D, prior statement of witness.
It doesn't satisfy those, Your Honor. I don't have the rule in front of me, but there are certain exceptions that prior statement of witnesses can be used for, and I don't believe this is one of those. It's for impeachment and other materials, Your Honor. I think, again, I'm not aware that it satisfies anything else.
Okay. Inconsistent.
Right, the very limited circumstances which the 801D exception can be used.
So often rebut an express or implied charge against the declarant recent application.
It's either a prior inconsistent statement and a prior consistent statement or one of identification. Those are the only three, and this doesn't satisfy any.
Your Honor, first of all, the testimony of what conversation she had with President Simon, she is subject to cross-examination here in court. That is a statement made in court. It's not an out-of-court statement. And any response by Ms. Simon is admissible because it indicates what she knew and when she knew it. And so that's a statement by the declarant against interest. Therefore, it's neither one of those are accepted by the hearsay rule.
Your Honor, none of that follows because the statement that's being offered is not an in-court statement. The question was, did you discuss with Ms. Simon and what did you discuss? Presumably in 2014. That is the basis of hearsay. That is an out-of-court statement. He's not asking her, have you spoken with Ms. Simon? Not in court on the record today. So we'll be clear on that. That is definitional hearsay. That question calls for.
Well, it's about time for a break.
Okay.
If you want to discuss it off the record, that's fine. If not, then we'll come at during break and come back.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
About 10-minute recess.
And, Your Honor, same instruction to the witness, do not discuss this testimony until she returns.
Your excuse.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're all free to go.
Okay.
You don't need to stand around, get some exercise. Look out in the sunshine when you're Under Sheriff, is there something exciting going on? Or are you just coming to visit?
What time shall we reconvene? Or how long?
10 minutes, 10:30.
Question was,
Mr. Silver, or I'm just checking. I'm asking. Okay, go ahead.
it was, did she speak with President Simon about the additional responsibilities follow-up from the 2011, your colleague letter, and also the additional responsibilities by the modification of sexual assault?
Okay.
You're very good. So, like I said, someone showed up.
How's your battery? My camera battery is almost dead. My phone tag just doesn't count as either. But this is doing well. Are you good?
Are you freezing?
Chilly. I was